We're going back for our classic interview today to an interview I found truly endlessly fascinating. This was an interview from 2014 with a guy named Michael Glatze. He is formerly gay, and I know that that doesn't make any sense to a lot of people in our audience. It didn't really make sense to me either, but he joined us, and I don't think we need a long introduction here. Suffice it to say, he quit homosexuality. He used to be gay, and he no longer is. I had a lot of questions about that. As you can imagine, he now is a pastor in Wyoming, which is interesting sort of in and of itself. I will present it to you because it is truly compelling stuff. This is Michael Glatze going back to March of 2014, this week's classic interview. I'm joined today by Michael Glatze. He's a pastor in Wyoming. In a previous life, he was co-founder of Young Gay America. He was a former advocate for gay rights. You received some coverage, Michael, when you publicly announced that you were no longer identifying as gay. So I kind of want to just walk through your life, essentially, if we can, so to maybe give people a better or more direct understanding of your past. So let's go back to the very beginning, if we can. What was your early life like growing up? And maybe you can give us a sense of what your sexual attraction was at that time.
Sure. I guess first off, thanks for having me. And, just right off the bat, I want to say, before we go any further, is I'm mostly here to sort of acknowledge my own part in a lot of hurt and pain that has been caused to a lot of folks. And so I just want to put that out there first. I'm kind of hoping that maybe you and me talking today is an opportunity for me to kind of step away from even discourse around sexuality. It's something that Wayne Beeson and I had talked about earlier, and his comments to me were, you don't really need to be sort of in the spotlight talking about this stuff all the time, because it's not really very helpful. And I had to think about that, and I thought, well, I can, and I'm not going to not answer your question, David, but if I think back to my own life, it's like, well, why is my life any more interesting than anybody else's? Everybody's identity develops in a unique way inside of that individual. And I think for me, I've been so steeped in identity politics over the last 20 years that I'm actually kind of interested in getting out of it. So
well, I think that I think it's a good, I think that a good way to get out of that would be if first we dissociate from all the political stuff of Republicans and Democrats and all that stuff, and just kind of give people a sense of, if you think back, do you remember at your earliest childhood having attractions to men, women, both?
Yeah, I would say both. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. And then as you started to develop, maybe when you were a teenager, or I don't know whenever the point was where you pursued relationships, were those relationships pursued with men, women, or both?
Well, I pursued relationships with girls in high school, and then also I was feeling attraction towards guys at the same time. So there was a lot of confusion. I was in high school in the 90s, early 90s, and so it was a different time politically and culturally. Also, I had a bit of a sort of a Christian upbringing, not a strict Christian upbringing, but leanings in that way. And so there was some shame involved in obviously the same-sex attractions that I had. So, but then my parents died young, and so it kind of, when I was young, my parents died, and so it kind of gave me, I guess, a freedom, so to speak, to explore, if you want to call it that. And so it wasn't until I was at college that I got involved with another man for the first time.
So you had what I think is maybe about a 10-year relationship with a man, and at a certain point you decided that well, I don't even want to put words in your mouth. How did you go? I will just ask it plainly. How did you go from a long-term relationship with a man to now being married to a woman and considering yourself no longer gay or bisexual?
Well, I guess maybe I'll just sort of put something out there. I guess to a certain extent, I would probably put out that I think everybody is bisexual. I think that sexuality is fluid. I've been saying that for years, and I think that I'm right about that. I'd love for someone to argue with me about that, but I just think that's the way that people are wired,
Well, let's
which
pause there maybe before you answer. I think that when we talk about sexual fluidity, there's two ways it can be interpreted. Number one is the way that sometimes, for example, Brian Fisher talks about when I interview him, which is that individuals can change from being heterosexual to homosexual or bisexual. The other definition of fluidity would be that people are somewhere on a spectrum of sorts between
yeah.
gay and straight, and those are two very, very different things. The first one that I mentioned, which Brian Fisher likes, is used very often to push the idea that sexual orientation is a choice, and therefore it becomes very political because it's often used to try to limit rights. So I'm curious, which of the two meanings you're using?
I think for me, that's been part of my journey, has been to try to figure out, well, what is the truth? And is it about choice or is it about fluidity? And it's something that I know that for me, I've definitely, I guess to use a word that I don't even know if it's a word, but I've dogmatized myself, by saying, well, because I've noticed in my own experience a fluidity, that must be, the absolute way that it is.
So let's explore.
I think that's been an error.
So then, if you can kind of give us the kind of relatively quick summary of how you went from a relationship with a man to marrying a woman.
If I look back, I mean, we had Ben and I had a good and healthy relationship for the most part, but no relationship is perfect. I'm still, I still honor him as a person and called him recently to wish him well, and his mom just died, and there were a lot of stressors in our lives at that time. And, one thing kind of leads to another. And I honestly don't think that it would be fair for me to go kind of beyond that at this point, because that's the most honest I can be at this point.
So what I'm hearing from you, we don't need to know specifically why the relationship ended, but more was the idea of how you went from someone who was co-founder of Young Gay America, advocate of gay rights, in a long-term and, as you describe, healthy relationship with someone that you still respect, to saying, I'm no longer identifying as gay nor bisexual. I'm in a relationship with a woman. I'm now a Christian pastor. That's a big transition.
It is a big transition, and I'm not saying that's not the case, but just to try to be honest about it, the different factors that were coming into play in my heart at that time, when now we're talking about 10 years ago, really, in a lot of ways, one of those factors was a spiritual search. Listeners are not a Christian, just hear me out.
No, I understand that, but I think for the purposes of our conversation, was it the teachings of Jesus that suggested to you what you were doing was wrong?
Well, that's the interesting thing. So yes, in a sense, but no, in another sense. And I don't mean to be evasive, but let me just try to explain where I was at in 2003. In 2003, we were filming movies and doing media where we were going down to raise awareness for gay and lesbian and transgendered, queer, bisexual, questioning youth. And at that time, the enemy was right-wing Christianity, or all the politics and all of that. So for me, there was a sense in which I was definitely facing an enemy. And yet, at some point, that enemy started to touch my heart. Well, then I had my much publicized health scare, which was really just I had a lot of heart palpitations and anxiety. I feared for my life for the first time in my life. I feared death, really up close mortality sort of thoughts. And at that point, after finding out that I didn't have anything major, I went back home to my room and I said, "Thank you, God." And it was the first time in my entire life that I acknowledged God.
Yeah.
And I bought a Bible and I started reading it. And I resonated with the letters of Jesus Christ. I resonated with the words of Jesus Christ, the red letters. And I actually went to Ben and all the other folks and I was trying to tell them, this stuff is really good. It's like the best self-help book you'll ever find. And I was very kind of turned on by the words there in the Bible. Fast forward, now I'm questioning my own sexuality and wondering whether that has something to do with my dissatisfaction in my heart. I'm praying now to God for the first time, trying to figure out what He wants me to do.
Hmm.
Fast forward about a year, I'm evolving in my thought process, if you want to call it evolving. I'm changing in my thought process yet again to the point where I'm determining that God doesn't want me to be involved in homosexuality, and instead has shown me that my identity is not gay, but my identity is heterosexual. So I don't know if that answers your question completely.
Yeah, no,
but
it really pretty does. It pretty much does. And, you know, we are kind of out of time. We did go over a little bit, and it's just a fascinating story. I'll give you, from an outsider's perspective, as someone who has interviewed people from all over the range of the both political and social spectrum, what I'm hearing from you is that you were clearly born bisexual. That's not something that has changed, but because of the influence that you attribute to Jesus Christ, who says that you shouldn't be gay, you've distanced yourself from that. But I think you're clearly a bisexual guy.
Well, you know, I mean, you have the absolute freedom to analyze me in whatever way you'd like to do that. And I have no problem with that analysis. I have no problem with anybody's analysis of me. I'm kind of at a point where I'm like, look, this is not interesting to me. I know that right now in my life, you know, this is not something I'm interested in, is homosexuality. It's not any part of my life.
No, no. Well, I want to be totally clear, Michael. I'm not saying you should or shouldn't do anything, but what seems to me very clear is that your natural attraction was to both men and women, and now for religious reasons, as you said, God doesn't want you to be involved with homosexuality. But my question was one of your wife.
Yeah, no, that's a good analysis, but I wouldn't completely agree with you, but I respect your opinion.
Has your wife expressed or asked questions? Does she ask, are you still attracted to men? Is that a conversation you have?
Well, absolutely. We've been friends for 3 years, and we've talked about all this stuff, so absolutely, yes.
Okay, all right. Well, we've been speaking with Michael Glatze. He is a pastor in Wyoming. I think it's a fascinating conversation, and I can't thank you enough, Michael, for being on today.
Well, you know, I'm grateful, and thank you very much.